questions. And at this time, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Larry Cadwell. Dr. Cadwell has been, is going to talk about climate change, and he's been involved in science, ecology, and conservation for his whole life. He's so interested in the outdoors that he has degrees in wildlife conservation, wildlife biology, health physics, and radiation ecology. And he worked for a long time for the U.S. Department of Energy as a researcher, and he also worked for as a research scientist for managing research projects for several government agencies. And he was a college professor, and he is retired now, but he has, I guarantee you, he has kept up to date on everything and has a lot to talk to us about, to tell us about today, about climate change and what we can do to help mitigate climate change. And so let's all welcome Dr. Cadwell.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you today. This is something I've been following for as long as climate change has been important, and I've been aware of it. So that's been 35 years or so. Some of what I want to introduce you with is just a little bit of the science. We have to start with that in order to understand it, but it's not a great deal. Probably the most significant part of climate change and how it affects us has to do with water and moisture. And let me just give you a little bit of the story on that. Water in our oceans, particularly down in the Gulf of Mexico, is heating up. I'm going to tell you about moisture and the importance of the oceans and how that affects us right here in LaPorte County. And if we understand that, then all of the other things kind of fall in place. Water, the oceans are a huge heat sink. A lot of of course, you know, our oceans are warming up. The air above the oceans is warming up, and that causes evaporation. When the temperature goes up, the air can hold more moisture. So now we have, think of the Gulf of Mexico, a mass of air that has more moisture in it than it ever did before because of the warming of the air and the evaporation from the warm seawater. And if you've watched any of the news on all of the hurricanes and any of that, you know that much of our moisture, or excuse me, much of our weather comes up the Mississippi Valley. Much of the Midwest and all of the East really lives and dies on what happens with regard to water coming that way. And water is so important for all aspects of climate change and how it affects us. With that here, what are we experiencing? We're experiencing more rainfall than ever before, more snowfall. Our air is much more humid. There's more moisture in it. Not only are we seeing warmer climate, warmer weather right here, we're seeing the humidity up. We're seeing precipitation, wind, and extremes of climate. So both temperature and moisture extremes are more than they've ever been. You would think that just warming of the climate would mean that that's all that's happening, but it's not. Not only are we getting hotter hots, we're getting colder colds. We're getting more extreme wind. All of those things, although the average is warmer and moisture, we're getting those as extremes. There are on the chat a couple of references there for you in terms of what's happening locally, where you can go and get more information. There is at Purdue University a climate change research group there. That's one of those that you can see on the chat that's referenced. And there's a lot in there about how climate affects us and what they at Purdue are doing about it for us here in Indiana. There are 90 scientists in that group. So that's a very good resource if you're interested in more information. Another one, are we still okay? I heard a noise. So another thing is, what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought there. So what the Purdue, other thing that, the Union of Concerned Scientists, that's the second reference there that I have on the chat. And that's an association of 11,000 or so scientists. And a lot of what they're all about is dealing with climate change. There's a tremendous amount of information there. All you have to do is Google them and you can find that. And I should say, if you're really interested in anything about climate change, I'm sure if you've ever baked cookies or wanted to change the belt on your lawnmower, you go on and Google, you can find something there. You just type that in and the words. So if you type in climate change and then put whatever it is that you're interested in, whether it's disease, whether it's water quality, whatever it is, you'll get tons and tons of information on that. So at Purdue, I had the pleasure a couple years ago of listening to a speaker from that group, that research group at Purdue, and he pointed out, and I've since verified and looked at their site, that right now here in Indiana, in LaPorte County, we are experiencing 5.6 inches more rainfall than we did a century ago. That's a lot. We are also experiencing 1.2 degrees warmer Fahrenheit temperature. But just in contrast, different regions of the country are doing different things. In the Southwest, they are experiencing 5 inches less precipitation. So the climate effects in the Southwest are different than they are here. We see that on a national scale, and we certainly see locally what's happening here. In response to all that moisture, that massive moisture, the more rainfall, we're seeing our water tables go up. In our lakes and ponds, the elevations are raising. We have a little, our Rolling Prairie Conservation Club has a little trail behind the school, and it goes out, and there's a pond back there that was put in 25 years ago and has a deck on that pond. And that was where the students can go out, take water samples, and do some laboratory work outside. In 2018, a very wet year for us here, the water level went up to the point where that deck is now underwater. So you can go out, you can see the deck, you can't walk to it because it's now further out in the pond. The water area is enlarged. So that's happening not just with regard to the little pond in Rolling Prairie, but Lake Michigan as well, and every other body of water we have. That has huge implications for what it means to us. So when we combine rainfall and temperature, a lot of things happen ecologically or in relationship to that. What does that mean for, let's say, for agriculture around here? It means that we have a longer growing season. So the growing season starts earlier, ends later, the frost-free season is longer. You would think maybe that's a boon for agriculture. And that seems to be logical, but it's not necessarily true. The other thing that's happening along with that is wetter springs. And you all probably remember just last year, farmers couldn't get in their fields. So even though the growing season is longer, theoretically that should be better. But if the farmers can't get into the fields to plant their crops, and that's occurring more and more frequently, that's becoming a huge problem. So, and just as an aside, one of the things that the research group at Purdue is doing is how do you mitigate for some of those kinds of things? And they are, for example, developing new crops. Plant geneticists now need to come up with new kinds of plants to fill the voids that are being eliminated, or the opportunity to grow other kinds of plants. So whether it's new species and new types of crops, in a few years, peanuts could be a great crop for us right here. Something we consider having grown in Georgia. The other, I guess so at any rate, a longer growing season, wetter days, but also in terms of those extremes, we're having more droughts. Even though our overall water averages are up, this last summer in July was a very, very dry period of time for us. And that's happening more and more frequently, not only here, but around the whole United States. So those extremes are causing problems for agriculture. Let me show you a crop that I've grown myself. This is an apple. It's a Golden Delicious on my tree. I guess you can see it probably all right here. But I want to show you the rest of this apple. I kind of hid something from you. If you can all see that clearly, that's a fungus growing on my apple. Now, I'm not going to tell you that, and it's called sooty blotch. If you went to the store, you probably wouldn't buy this apple. If you like to go up in Michigan or around northern Indiana and you pick apples, you're not going to want to see these. And indeed, you don't. And the reason you don't is because fungicides are being used to control that. So what does climate change mean to you and here and to us? It means that, and I just read an article on Vermont, the same situation they have there, that the fungal diseases are causing them to have to spray their crop more and more. They used to put on 4 to 5 applications of fungicide to make an apple crop. Now it's gone up by about a factor of, or a couple. So instead of 4 to 5, it's 6 to 7 applications of fungicide. Do you really want to have more chemicals on your crop? Well, probably not, but if you're going to have a good apple, it's a requirement. So that's happening, and I should say, I can't tell you this isn't something that's, the disease itself isn't something that's unique or new. It's been around for a while, but can we say definitively it's caused by climate change? No, but what is worse is that what has been made worse is that the disease itself is more prevalent, it's over a longer period of time, and it takes more effort to combat that disease. So you're going to pay more for your fruit, and as a result of that. Another thing about apples, and on the tree that this was grown, this year, we have 24 apples, about 2 dozen apples on the tree. It's a 6-year-old tree, and it should have produced 3 or 4 or 5 bushel of apples. What's going on? And I can tell you that one of the things, I think I have something here, maybe a pen and a paper. This is, well, this was a South Bend Tribune, and it's talking about you pick apples. And it mentions right at the very beginning something about fewer apples this year. And indeed there are fewer apples. And then a quote in here, and this is a quote from Carrie Garwood, Garwood's Orchard. You're probably all familiar with that. And she says here that it's a busy season, but sadly, damage from freezing temperatures in the year have affected the availability and the amount of fruit that they have. And my 24 apples, when I should have had 2 or 3 bushels, is indeed that very same thing. Well, what does that have to do with climate change? Have we had frost before? Sure, we've always had frost. It's always been an issue, but it's a much more significant issue now with our changing climate. We have a longer growing season. With that longer season, we have earlier bloom. So the bloom comes out earlier, but this year, and maybe you remember it, on Mother's Day, the night before, we had an exceptionally cold night. Here, we had 23 degrees. The bloom was out. The average frost-free date, and I looked it up this morning in the Farmer's Almanac for LaPorte, is April 19th. That's when you would say, okay, maybe I can put my tomatoes out and they're probably going to be okay. Okay, now fast forward from April 19th to May the 9th, and we had 23 degrees. Extremely unusual, and it's somewhat localized, but this part of Indiana has pretty much wiped out much of our crop. I was at Fisher's yesterday. Maybe you know them on Fair Road. They have the pumpkins and some fruit. I talked to the lady there, the same sort of thing. Their crop is down. We're seeing 2 years ago, what did we have? A little different climate impact on our fruit. And that was that we had a new term in terms of weather, new to me in the last few years, and maybe you, is polar vortex. What on earth is that all about? Extreme cold during the winter. So again, we lost the crop. So even though I've had this orchard in 5 or 6 years, the first 2 or 3 years were just to get them up enough so they produce fruit. But the last 2, the polar vortex got me 1 year, the frost got me this year, and both of those are unexpected events occurring much more frequently now than ever before. And that's something that we can look forward to, much more of that going forward. So more disease on plants of all kinds. If you're a gardener, and the wet, moist, relative humidity up kind of a climate is going to produce in your garden. Maybe you've perhaps have noticed more powdery mildew on roses or other flowers. Maybe you're having problems with disease in the garden. I'm a gardener and I know that I have a lot of that issues. It's more difficult for me to grow tomatoes and peppers because of the kinds of diseases that we have in our own home gardens. We can have viruses, we can have bacterial problems, or we can have fungal problems. And of the 3, the fungus, the bacteria, and the virus, 2 of those, not the virus so much, but certainly the bacteria and the fungus are all related to how much of that we have is related to how moist it is and how warm it is. So a longer season for the fungus to grow, and it can affect almost any of your plants out there. For me, I'm seeing it primarily in things like tomatoes and green peppers. I used to be able to grow tremendous green peppers. Now, were I to be able to do that, I'd have to figure out how to find the right chemical to put on them to be able to do it. So my anecdotal observations don't prove anything, but I think the handwriting is on the wall. There's no substitute for intuition, biological know-how, and common sense, and it isn't hard to see what's happening. So what about humans and human diseases? The longer and wetter season is one of the things it's doing is extending the season, that wet and humid season, for a longer period of times, and we're seeing more mosquitoes. More and more mosquitoes all the time. In fact, this is the South Bend paper. I think it was on the 24th of September, at war with mosquitoes. And the news media, by and large, usually tells you the what, but it doesn't say a lot often about the how and the why. But in this case, they did. And Joy, my wife, was watching television, and she stomped on the floor, and something startled her. And it was a light that passed through our window at close range early in the evening. It turns out it was the spray planes that came over. You're probably aware that 350,000 acres in Northwest Indiana and more than that in Michigan were recently sprayed to combat mosquitoes for Eastern equine encephalitis. All right, what's the deal? Has that ever happened before? Well, we've had a little encephalitis the past few years. It's getting more and more attention. It's not that the encephalitis is new, climate hasn't changed that, but the prevalence of it, because we have more mosquitoes, our ponds are bigger, our season for mosquitoes to live and grow is longer, the temperatures are correct for them to grow, and even the scientists are telling us that the kinds of vectors that carry these diseases that are moving up are going to be increasing. We have 2 genera of mosquitoes here, Anopheles and Culex, each one of them and multiple species. So we're going to be seeing more different kinds of insects that are vectors for disease, carrying those diseases. One of them also is West Nile virus. You're probably aware of that. Again, that's the thing we're seeing more of, and we're going to continue to see more pressure from that as our populations and numbers of mosquitoes increase in response to the changes in climate. So that's what's affecting us here. And the airplanes coming over at low elevation, we can probably expect to see more of those as a result. So those are just some of the kinds of things that we're seeing with regard to that. Bonnie, could you put up the photo of the house that I have there? Okay, I just took this picture Saturday. I was driving down the road, saw this house, and as what you can see now, it doesn't look a whole lot different than that apple. Now, as it turns out, the vinyl siding is known to collect dust and dirt can be a medium for the growth of now fungus growing on houses. Okay, that's good for the photo, but so now the same thing that is affecting the mosquitoes, the same thing that's affecting the apples now is starting to cause more and more things like mold growing on our houses. It's not that it wasn't here before or couldn't be before, but it's going to be more prevalent. And I would be interested maybe in the chat if anybody has a comment. I've only lived back here in a new house that we built in 2013. And right now, the last year or two, we have quite a bit of mold growing on the side of our house. If you have had a house with vinyl siding for 15 or 20 years, I'd be interested to hear whether or not you have had, seeing now more recently than earlier, a more prevalence of mold on it. Well, it's not just the mold on the outside of the house. I just looked at an EPA report about what about the inside of the house in mold. Well, climate change affects that just as well. And one of the reports that I read suggested that the kind of thing you see on the outside can be driven to the inside. If you suffer from allergies, or if you suffer from asthma and that kind of thing, you can expect that to be worse. Because if the humidity on the outside is going to be greater, the humidity on the inside is going to be greater. The temperature facilitates that growth. So those are some of the kind of things that we can expect to see there. Let me talk a little bit about heat stress. I'm sure you've all heard about heat stress, and and what's been in the news more recently is in California, where we have pickers are working to harvest the foods that we eat, extreme temperatures, and now these people are working outdoors at 105, 110 degrees to pick the fruit to bring it to us. Okay, well, we can say, well, that's there and that's them and that's not us. It is us. And it's going to be more and more us as time goes by. Our bodies are wonderful heat dissipating machines, and we can drink a lot of water, we can sweat, and when we do that, we get evaporative cooling, and that works really, really well until the humidity goes up. And the higher the humidity, the less we function that way. So something that might cause actual death in terms of just temperature in California might be 127 degrees. As the humidity goes up in the eastern part of the United States, Florida right now, and climates where we have high temperature and humidity, the risk of heat exhaustion and actually death from heat is going up substantially. So another thing that the Purdue researchers mentioned was that what was it? I lost my train of thought, but if I get back to it, I'll come back to that. So so this heat exhaustion kind of thing, does it really affect us here and now? I was talking to a friend of mine just a few days ago, and he's got a job, but he also has a second business as a tree trimmer. And I was asking him how it was going. He said, well, he lost 2 employees this year. And he works part-time, and they work primarily on the weekends. So 2 of his people, he said, quit on him. And I said, well, what was that all about? He said, well, they couldn't take the heat anymore. Now, heat exhaustion and the risk from heat is more severe for the very young and the very old. Now, it turns out that, I'm one of those, and some of you are as well, those 2 people that quit, he said one of them was 65 and the other was 70. Well, this was not a really strenuous job. What the people doing, he does the cutting, he's up on the lift, and these people were just manning the ropes down below to bring the limbs that he cut down to the ground, and they were feeding them into the chipper. but it got so bad for them that they couldn't do it anymore. And I know for myself, and I don't know what you do if you're gardeners or spend much time out, if you've done it this summer, but right now, in the last several years, 2 or 3 years, if I have work to do outside, I get out there at 6:30 or 7. By 10:30 or 11, hot, humid days, I'm inside. We can't do it. So it's going to take younger people. They can stand it a little bit more, but the worse this gets for us in terms of the climate change, the humidity, and the temperature, the more problems we're going to have with heat. Let's see, how are we doing? Oh, okay, we're not. We don't have a lot of time. I'll try and wrap this up in about 5 minutes here, and take it from there. But okay. Let's talk about a little bit about what you can do personally and actions that you can take to get us through climate change kind of thing. The most important thing is to increase your knowledge base. So the more you know and the more you understand about what's really happening, why it's happening, and how it's happening, the more you're going to be able to talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, and actually get the word out. One of the things that I did, my grandchildren, several of them live in California. Last time I was out there, I decided to just have a little talk with them. So I shuttled the adults out of the room. Well, some of these grandchildren are also adults, but the older people out of the room, I said, hey, kids, let's have a little talk. And we talked about climate change, and I challenged them to talk to their friends about climate change. And I told them some of the same kind of things I've been talking to you about. But for us, I'm not concerned about dying from climate change or being too dramatically impacted, although I'm not working outside like I did in the middle of the day. For our kids, if kids from people my age, okay, things are going to be a little bit worse for them when they're our age. For our grandchildren, it could be absolutely catastrophic, and for the rest of every living thing on Earth. So it's important that we get the conversation going with regard to that. That's kind of an example of what I call, I want to stand up and show you my shirt. Okay. I haven't been an activist my whole life, and I suppose some of you maybe have been on the march more than I have. But the last 3 or 4 years, I have done 2 or 3 different things regarding climate change. And this was the People's March in 2017, one of the first ones that I did. I'm not going to say that you necessarily need to be a sign-holding, marching activist, although it would be great if you are. But what I call being a casual climate activist. And that means this very shirt. I'm going to show you some more of my wardrobe. Okay. There's another shirt. That one has to do with solar. I help out with that a little bit. Here's a shirt that my daughter sent to me. Okay, another one. As you can see, my selection of shirts is limited in terms of what I like to wear. But when I go places, I wear these shirts. I want people to see these things. So it doesn't take a lot of work to do this. It doesn't take a lot of work to have the conversation. It doesn't, especially talk to your grandchildren. These are all extremely important things to get the mindset around how serious this issue is, and that there are people that are looking and thinking about it. What are some of the other real things that you can do? Of course, we need to use less energy. If your front door, if you can throw a cat under the front door, you need to tighten up that house. So weatherproofing your house, insulating your house are wonderful, wonderful things to do. If you still have incandescent lights in your house, pitch those things. LEDs are now cheap. 6 or 7 years ago, when we built this house, they weren't. We had some incandescents. We've got those all changed out. We're using a lot less energy. This house that we're sitting in right now, we built in 2012. And it is a passive solar home. What does that mean? It means it's a very tight, very energy efficient home, and it has windows on the south side that are triple glazed, and the sun comes in and heats up the house, and the house holds that in there. They evaluated this house after it was built, and this home uses 40% of the energy of a standard built home. So, okay, I've cut that down by 40%. Another thing we did is then put solar panels out, maybe I won't have time to talk about that, but that took care of the other 40%. So now we're living in a net zero house. That means that we produce all of the electrical energy that we use. We now have an electric car, and our backyard solar panels actually fuel our car and heat and cool our house. So if you don't have Energy Star appliances, next time you have to change out an appliance, make sure you do. Support STEM in education, science, technology, engineering, and math. Why is that important? Because the challenge of climate change brings on a lot of need for people with the technology to address climate issues. Couldn't be more important. It's always been important, but more so now than ever before. Simple little things like protecting wetlands. One of the things that, again, I didn't get to talk about this that I had hoped to, but more rainfall, more runoff, more contaminants into more ponds, our water supplies, including Lake Michigan and including other bodies of water, those are being contaminated more because of the more precipitation, the more water that goes into the soil, our agricultural crops. Lake Erie, for example, has an algal bloom, a toxic algal bloom. So if we're going to preserve water quality, wetlands are really important, and it's more so because climate change is putting more pressure on water quality. Let the next vehicle you purchase be a more efficient one. 12 years ago, my vehicles that I was operating were 20 to 25 miles per gallon average. Over the years, I've changed a couple of times. My vehicle now, our primary vehicle, 112 miles per gallon equivalent gasoline. So anybody play golf? Ever rent a golf cart? Do you have a choice? Electric cart or gasoline cart? You could easily make that choice, but if you want to be a casual climate activist, talk to the management and say, hey, you know what, I'd really like to play more golf here, but if you had more electric carts, I would. But with these gas carts, you know, all that pollution bothers me a little bit, and I'm concerned about what that's doing to our environment. Tell them that you want an electric vehicle to ride around on the golf course. That's, I think I probably, we have a few minutes. I didn't get nearly everything done that I would like to have said, but it was fun, and whatever questions you have, I'm game. Yes.
I've recently been intrigued by some things I've read and heard about regenerative agriculture.
Yes.
And I wondered if you have anything to say about that.
Actually, regenerative agriculture is wonderful. There is a book on it. It's called From Dirt to Soil. It's by a guy named Gabe Brown, and we do have ag fields right out here on our farm. I have given a copy of that book to our farmer who's farming it, and he, by the way, does use cover crops. And another thing I wanted to talk about without enough time is carbon sequestration and how we can use agriculture to increase the biomass, standing biomass, to hold more of the carbon. And so cover crops are an important part of that. And the development of and use of cover crops and the mixes of how what crops are used and how is also a very important part of it, regenerative agriculture. So don't have time to go into a lot of the details on it, but a wonderful question, and that's the way agriculture really needs to go, and that's the way our Department of Agriculture needs to influence and try to direct crop payments to support those kind of activities, not just pay farmers billions of dollars. In other words, we have just this, in the last 2 years, given farmers just because of the crop prices, given them money to the tune of $37 billion, with another 15 coming this year. So we're right up, 45 or 50 billion dollars. Why not direct that money to regenerative agriculture, give them the same amount of money, but require them to do something that helps the carbon sequestration and helps the climate? Good question.
Make a point that would be great. I've seen movement within the state of Indiana and also on the federal government level that they're encouraging farmers to actually use cover crops during the period of time that they're not growing food or whatever for biofuels. So I think that's an important movement. I've also seen that be a bipartisan effort. So I think we're seeing changes come down the pike because of that.
Absolutely, that's great. And could we just, Bonnie, could you just flash up that photograph that we didn't get to? I want to just expand on that just a little bit. Is that still possible, Bonnie?
Yes. One moment here.
Okay, this one, yeah, this one. What you see here is several different things. The lawn is on the right. On the left is native prairie planting. Behind that, you'll see a cornfield. Behind that, you see trees. So carbon sequestration and what we do with cropland. On our lawn, we mow it 20, 25 times a year. The grass is very shallow. There's not much biomass there. It's pretty much a wasteland in terms of capturing carbon and helping the environment. Not a great thing. Better is the cover crop on the left, the crop on the left, which is the native grasses. They're not mowed. The biomass accumulates. The depth of the roots is much, much deeper. And so there's a lot more carbon stored and maintained there than on the lawn. A much better solution. The crop field you see in the back, our farmer, he does put cover crops on. Sometimes they're planted before the crop is harvested and sometimes after. So those are absolutely the way to go. And you're right, Indiana is actually doing better than many states on it. But if you take a drive, you'll see after the harvest season, you'll see little crops growing up in some places. If you go down toward the Kankakee River, you'll see a lot of fields with just bare ground. They've tilled it all up and it sits there. That's a bad deal. But thanks for that question. It's great.
So we have these community gardens over at Head Start, over at Neiman School. And actually we had the best year ever for tomatoes and cherry tomatoes and zucchini. But it was our first year doing a no-till garden. And at the end of last year, we had a bunch of fungus that really ruined the squash crops. But I pulled out those plants and I put them in my compost heap, and hopefully it's all gone away. So do you have anything to say about no-till gardening?
No-till gardening and no-till farming in particular are great, because what they do, and in fact, the farmers that farm this land, they put in the cover crop, but when they plant, they don't till the land at all. They plant into that cover crop. That's basically no-till, or if they can't plant right through it with their devices, they simply have a device that just separates a little path to drop the seed in and leaves all of the biomass there to decompose, to help smother the weeds, and to maintain the organic matter that contains the carbon and doesn't put it back into the atmosphere quite as fast. The same for gardening. I have raised bed gardens, and I do no-till in those as well. So that's a good way to go. Very conservation friendly method.
Do you have a device that plants the seeds, or do you plant transplants?
I don't plant myself. We own the land. The farmers come in, but yeah, they have no-till planting equipment. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
If we have if there aren't any more questions, if we have a couple more minutes, I just want to say one more thing. This is another impact of climate change, and it has to do with the fires. The fires in California. You've all seen the smoke come this way, and you say, well, so okay, those fires in California don't affect us. Yes, indeed, they do. My solar panels that you saw in that photograph there on the side. Just before the fire came, I have a little app that I can look and see how much the power was produced during the day from the time the sun comes up at night till in the evening. And I had a very nice clear day with no clouds in the sky. And then 2 or 3 days later, the smoky mass of air moved in, and I had the same thing. No clouds in the sky, but we had not those blue skies, clear skies, we had the smoky skies. My solar panel power level decreased about 15% on those days. That's just me. How many solar panels are there locally? The utilities across the whole United States, millions of solar panels. Many of those had reduced production of electricity. So the fires in California cost me power. It cost our utility company. So their solar panels weren't as effective. They had to ramp up their gas-fired plants to produce the power that normally would have come from the solar panels. And so this is one of the things about climate change, that no matter how you talk about it and what occurs, oftentimes what happens is it becomes worse as a result of the warming of the climate and drying out of California. The fires burned, went into the atmosphere. It caused more global warming because now we have more CO2 in the atmosphere. It caused my solar panels to produce less. We had to burn more fossil fuel to put more carbon into the atmosphere to warm it more in California so that they could dry out their forest and burn some more. So it's a cyclic process. Climate change feeds on itself, makes itself worse, no matter how or what we do about it.
If I could add one more thing, please. I had done 2 weekends ago a session with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and it was on the psychology of talking about climate. And they were actually recommending dropping the terminology of climate change because it's such a divisive term. And if we talk about climate chaos or we talk about climate crisis, then we can just point to these changes that I think you did a really good job of talking about the changes we're seeing locally. So people can relate to things that are happening within LaPorte County or within Indiana, and not so much regarding polar bears, or wildfires out in California or whatever. But I believe everybody notices when their farmer neighbors aren't able to get their crops in on time because of the increased wetness during the spring and things like that. And people are noticing climate chaos and also climate crisis. So they really recommended using those terms instead of climate change, just because of the political thing that goes along with that. And, you totally remove yourself from people having to believe that this is happening or not. just talk about observations, that we're seeing and share those with people.
Very good point, and I agree with that. There's another concept, and that is that there are some people out there that don't believe or say they don't believe, and what it amounts to is people believe what they want to believe, and if there is just a certain segment of the population that want to believe and have been persuaded by various influences that there is no such thing as a climate crisis. Those who live in the hurricane zones and that sort of thing maybe are starting to change their minds, but that's a problem.
That derecho was something that we had this summer. The derecho.
The what?
Oh!
The derecho.
I don't know what that is.
It was a big wind.
Oh, thank you.
And it destroyed, like, I don't know, millions or billions of dollars of crops in Iowa. And it came through Illinois. I don't think it hit Indiana quite as badly, but it was here.
Yeah, things like polar vortex and derecho, things that I had never heard of 10 years ago.
I wanted to say that maybe you all know because you're all concerned about this, but I found out that you could call NIPSCO and ask that your power come from renewable sources. So I did. And the woman's like, well, what percentage of your energy would you like to come from renewable sources? I think this is electricity. And I said, well, I don't know how much it costs, so I don't know what percentage. And so I said, what would 100% be? And she looked it up and she said $1 something. I'm like, well, okay, then I'll go for $1. I'll go for 100%. I'm not sure everybody knows that. And it's simple. You just call up NIPSCO and it's a very 5-minute phone call. And the other thing I wanted to ask Larry is about probably 10 years ago now, I contacted a solar panel company to see if I could put solar panels on my roof. And they came out and they said I wasn't a candidate because I live under the trees in Michiana Shores. But I don't know if things have changed in solar panels in the meantime.
No, that's always going to be the case. So if you're interested in solar, my situation was we had trees here too, but some people will not tolerate solar panels, particularly if you live in town or have neighbors or whatever in your backyard. I could have put them on the roof and I could have put 20 or 30% more panels on the roof and compensated for the fact that there was some shading sometime, but I decided just to put the panels out back. But in answer to your question, no, the solar panels have to have sun. They have to have direct sunlight. So if you're not willing to cut the trees, or if you have some other obstruction, or you can't put the solar panels somewhere else off the roof, then that's probably still going to be true that you're not going to be a candidate for solar. But I don't know if it's available here, but in parts of the country, you can buy into community solar. In other words, that's available. I don't know the details of it, and it may not be available to us. But on that regard, with NIPSCO and solar, here was a very interesting thing. I remember about 3 months ago in the newspaper, there was a little article on NIPSCO and replacing in 2028 the Michigan City coal-fired power plant. And they put out an RFP, and that stands for Request for Proposal, to industry to come in and what are we going to replace that with? And they asked for 3 things. They asked for, first, one possibility is solar plus storage, 2 was solar plus wind, and the 3rd was solar plus other renewables. Well, what is the storage? Excuse me, I didn't mean solar plus other renewables. I meant renewables plus storage. So storage was a part of all 3 of those. What's happening now, the same batteries and type of batteries that are powering our electric cars and soon to be buses and trucks and other modes of transportation, those batteries are available in huge banks. They put them in, and the point on solar has been, well, when the sun doesn't shine, you got no solar. Now the big battery systems are there. The solar charges the battery systems, and during the evening when the demand comes up and the sun goes down and everybody's home from work, solar keeps producing through the battery energy that was stored and returned back. And that's what storage means. And that's what NIPSCO was asking for us right here in LaPorte County. A great thing.
Well, if there are no other questions right now, it is because you covered this so thoroughly, Larry, and I want to thank you very much. We learned a lot. We learned a ton of stuff today. Thank you so much for that, for sharing your knowledge with us. And we were honored that you would make time to speak to us. So thank you very much for that. And if we can all clap, even if you can't hear us. Yes, that's like Nancy is doing.
It was my pleasure. I want you to know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And we want to thank everyone for attending today. We have a few new faces, and so please consider joining LWV, and be sure that you're on the email list that Cheryl has so that you can learn about everything going on, including how to register for this weekend's Lake Michigan Region Conference. And Joanne, did you have anything you wanted to say right now?
Thank you. I am still here. I have to leave soon, but I certainly enjoyed hearing Larry. Thank you so much, Larry. It's always, I'm making notes here like crazy of things I'm going to follow up with, especially with gardening. We'll hope to have more luck next year. But it's been lots of fun. If you see that sign behind Bonnie on the sofa, that is one of our yard signs. I still have a few left. Again, if you're interested, just let us know. I keep giving our telephone number because that's a little bit easier for people to remember. But 219-874-9939. And we'll even try and deliver one to you if you'd like. Vote 411 if you have not voted yet. And I have already, and I think some of us have, and you want to know more about candidates, vote 411 is one way that you can find out. And we encourage you to vote early. Have a plan and vote early about how you're going to be doing it. Thanks again, Larry. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next month at our dinner with the league next month. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Thank you.